All right, and welcome to another episode of This Week in Hearing, where we break down the latest news, innovation, and trends occurring in all things hearing. So I'm joined here today by my good friend, Andy Bellavia.
Hello,
Andy,
everyone.
share a little bit about who you are for those that aren't familiar.
So I'm Andy Bellavia. I work for Knowles Corp in the Hearing Health Tech Division. We make microphones and speakers for all kinds of in-ear devices. And I'm responsible for everything but hearing aids. I've been involved in the hearables industry forever, also in-ear monitors for professional musicians, radio communications earpieces, and the like. And I also advocate for accessibility in hearing health and greater adoption of both hearing health solutions and hearing protection.
Fantastic. Good to have you on. Really looking forward to this conversation today. So Andy wrote a fantastic piece. He put it out on World Hearing Day back on March 3rd. And the title of the article is, quote, "Is the FDA's OTC hearing aid rule already obsolete?" And I thought that this would make for a really good conversation. This is something that Andy and I have been discussing really for years, whether it's been on this show or on my podcast, Future Ear Radio, just talking through the implications of what's happening on the consumer tech side. And I think Andy makes a really good case in this article about, how a lot of the underlying technology that's driving that side of the industry, whether it be AirPods and all the way down to $100 pair of Skull Candy headphones that's got, all kinds of different technology baked into it. I believe the newest is the Jacody, hearing technology into it. So, I think that it begs this question of and I think you make an amazing point here right at the beginning where you say, 5 years will have passed before the OTC rule takes effect later this year. That is an eternity in consumer tech. We've already moved beyond the devices envisioned when OTC was first proposed. The coming ability to load hearing software from a third party into unregulated consumer devices after purchase threatens to render the OTC regulations obsolete even as they are finalized. So let's just start there, kind of start to unpack your article and some of the ideas contained with it. But let's just kick things off and have you kind of frame the macro theme of this article and some of the different insight that you shared within this article.
Okay. And I'm not really the first person to think of this. I'm going to go back. You had that piece that's really popular to this day where you write about the benefits of the smartphone wars and how that filters into hearable devices, right? The mass production of the processors and how that drove mass market hearable devices. But I'm going to actually go to something earlier you wrote, and everybody tip your hat today for this one. This is his very first Future Ear Radio blog he ever wrote. And he says that the shift to Bluetooth connected devices represents a fundamental change as this new generation of connected devices are able to leverage the power of software. So I'm excerpting here, these connected devices are exotropic, with air quotes, meaning that they appreciate and value as long as the hardware permits through over-the-air software and firmware updates, as well as software app integration. You wrote that in 2017. Okay.
A little while ago.
And a little while ago, but it was very prescient. I think you were thinking about over-the-air updates provided by the first party. And you gave an example, for example, of a hearing aid being software updated, which I've done several times to mine. So I know how that goes. But the real question is what happens when you really have an app-based economy for your ear. Now, Apple is almost there, okay? Because you have AirPods, and when you buy AirPods Pro, right out of the box, they don't do anything of the kind with respect to hearing. But the updated operating system provides those features. Now, it's a closed ecosystem. Apple could choose to let third-party app developers get in on it. We'll see. But I'll think more about the Android ecosystem and how this would really work, because Android is device agnostic. A phone can use Android, whether it's got a Qualcomm Snapdragon processor in it or a MediaTek processor, it doesn't matter. Right? As long as the processor meets the basic requirements, Android is processor agnostic. And so you have an app-based economy with Android. third-party app writers, go to the Play Store, put their apps on, and you can run anything you want. The base smartphone has a certain set of core functionality, but you personalize it for your own use by what apps. One person may get Strava, one person may, this app or that, right? They've done that for smartwatches as well. They've got Wear OS, which is Android for smartwatches. And so they've carried that app ecosystem also to the smartwatch. What happens when they do it for the ear? Okay. Imagine a year or two from now, there is Hear OS, or
Totally.
Ear OS instead of Wear OS. And you have a fully fledged app economy within the ear space. And that's where things get really interesting. Kim Cavett had touched on this in her comments to the FDA for OTC hearing aids. She had a paragraph within her greater comment, mentioning that the FDA has to consider what software hearing aids are, to regulate software hearing aids. And she was thinking more about app-based, run Mimi on your phone, for example. But when you can actually download an app from anyone into an ordinary earbud, then it changes the environment completely because it's almost impossible to regulate. And that was really the point of the article.
Yeah. And I want to go back, actually. I love everything that you said there. And I kind of want to get from your perspective. You had touched upon what I previously mentioned about, the peace dividends of the smartphone war. I've referred to this a lot on different podcasts. This was an article that Chris Anderson wrote of 3D robotics. And again, the whole idea behind this is that when we had basically the smartphone race of all these different device manufacturers over the last 15 or so years, because of the economies of scale of the actual components inside of the devices, it really provided so many cost savings, and therefore it just kept driving the cost down, so that you then had a proliferation of all these other consumer devices, from smart speakers to drones to all these different things that all use these same chips and radios and microphones and all these different things. And from your perspective at Knowles as a supplier that is in this ecosystem, you can see it probably better than anyone. But I do think that it's a really good testament of understanding that, a lot of the things that have always sort of made hearing aids unique with the ASIC chips, the app specific integrated chips, these are things that had just sort of been limited to those types of chips because of the fact that a lot of the more general chips, like the digital signal processing chips, hadn't quite matured yet. And that's what we've really seen, I think, over the last 5-ish, 10 years, is this whole idea that the things that are powering smart speakers and drones and all these different things are the same exact types of components that are within all kinds of different ear-worn devices. And so you couple that with this explosion in the ear devices that are, from AirPods on down, in terms of the popularity and just the amount of devices that are being sold. Like you mentioned in your article that on an annual basis, about 20 million pairs of hearing aids are sold. We're at the point now where about 300 million pairs of true wireless headphones are sold. And that number is only going to continue to increase. And so again, the point is that the actual the components that comprise these devices, because of the economies of scale and the mass proliferation of all consumer tech that these components are populated within, it lends itself to this idea that there's going to be so much innovation upon those components, and that's what's ultimately going to drive all kinds of new different feature sets that will be you'll have hardware that is really affordable, that's going to increasingly become more and more robust with the types of functionality that it can support. So it's almost like the playing field is now available for all of this new, feature sets that are going to be laden on top of this economy, as there is increasingly more incentive to be building for these things. So I just wanted to preface things a little bit and just say that from the hardware side of things, I think that it's important to understand just how much has changed in terms of what's become even feasible now because of this massive proliferation of the underlying technology.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, the hardware is basically already there. That's almost a given. And if you think about any market at all in which 80 to 90% of the need is unfulfilled, it will get filled somehow. And it's just a fact of life. And right now, only 10 to 20% of people who need hearing assistance of some kind are getting it for whatever reason. And there are reasons, but those reasons will be accounted for and that market will be filled somehow, right? Nature abhors a vacuum and so does consumer tech. And so it's going to get done. Now, I think we still have to distinguish between a regulated hearing aid and a hearable device because, I mean, today the state of technology is such that hearable devices are perfectly capable of serving on situational basis, but they don't have the battery life yet, or realistically the comfort to be worn 16 hours. Like my hearing aids, I still, now going on 4 years after wearing them, I still forget I have them in sometimes and jump in the shower, still glad they're waterproof. So,
Yep.
But hearable devices, are perfectly functional for, 6 or 8 hour situational use, which is where most of the unmet need is anyway. And the other one too is once you start to get beyond moderate or, even in the upper end of moderate, it's really true that a person cannot get an optimal solution at home. Right. I mean, I know all the ins and outs of this industry, and I don't regret for a moment that I went to an audiologist at the level of severity where I'm at. I could have never tuned a set of hearable devices to give me the level of performance I have now. And those things will always remain. In fact, I actually think hearing care professionals' value increases as these solutions proliferate. But on the regulatory side, it gets to be much more difficult because right now, if you look at OTC, there's a lot of hardware specifications, distortion, volume limit, noise from the microphones, all this sort of thing. All bets are off the minute I buy a completely unregulated earphone and then later load hearing software into it. The only possible thing you could regulate in that case, unless the FDA chooses to regulate all earphones, the only thing that could really be regulated is gain. It could regulate the amount of gain that the software allows when you install an app. And even then, you really can only regulate those apps that are downloaded in the United States. And so it all gets very difficult to actually manage this in actual practice. And today, when you look at, the hundreds of bad, quote unquote, registered hearing aids being sold and the FDA's inability to rein that in, I think there's a lot of work ahead before a software-based set of hearing solutions could be regulated by any means.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think that, as you mentioned there, it's like, first of all, we've kind of had a semblance of OTC for a long time, whether it be with PSAPs or it be with, some of these like things that are in this gray zone of like completely unregulated. It seems as if it flies in the face of the FDA regulations, but yet they still exist. Just search hearing aids on Amazon and you'll get, hundreds of results with these 5-star reviews and you kind of scratch your chin. You're like, where did those come from? But I think that the broader point though, is that, with these devices, you have ultimately, we're talking about trying to solve for a very specific thing, which is, we all know in this industry that there is this really long delay in terms of when the realization that you need something and then when you ultimately take action, and that number fluctuates somewhere around 7 to 10 years. And I think that it's like we kind of in OTC, I think is a probably kind of emblematic of this, is like, is the solution here really another hearing aid? And that's where I think that things are going to become really interesting as this all unfolds, which is, I agree with you that there is absolutely a place for hearing aids. There are FDA grade 1 medical device that I think by and large right now are kind of servicing the population that really needs them, people that have high levels of severity of hearing loss. So I think that those are the kinds of people that are already kind of entering into the funnel to begin with. There's more that can be done there. Don't get me wrong. And I think that having more affordable options, more accessible options will do good. But I continue to think that that's kind of, again, trying to just, it's like the definition of insanity. It's like, you just keep coming up with the same solution every single time. And I think that the fact remains is that there's a lot more to this whole idea of like, why are people not really that compelled to take action on this thing? And is it because possibly they're not really all that infatuated with the idea of wearing hearing aids? And that's where I think this gets very, very interesting, is that when you start to look at it from the standpoint of, well, what if it's something that is a little bit more situational? You know, where are those frequently had instances throughout your day that you are challenged? Is it largely a speech and noise issue, something that frequently occurs within your work environment or in your social environment? And that is, you know, it presents, I think, some really interesting questions like the social environment. We've talked a lot about this, which is, you know, okay, so if I don't want to wear hearing aids, but I also want to be able to hear in these noisy situations and not feel like I'm kind of being left out of the mix, would I be willing to wear something that calls attention to myself because I'm wearing earbuds? And at what point does that become socially normalized to where, in the same sense of wearing cheaters out at a restaurant when you're looking at a menu, does it become normalized to wear cheaters for your ears at the dinner table to better hear in that conversation? I think those are the bigger questions that we need to understand and figure out what's actually going to normalize this type of behavior so that people will feel like this is a more approachable thing than maybe some of the connotation that comes with the associations that people have with the idea of wearing hearing aids.
Yeah, there's a lot of really good thoughts to unpack there. I mean, the wait time, especially because as it's presently constructed, OTC hearing aids don't really address the wait time, because you still have to acknowledge that you have some level of hearing loss and then act on it. And that's whether you go to an audiologist or you buy an OTC device. And, you know, a lot of conversation about exactly what is the mix of reasons why people wait the 7 to 10 years. But I don't think OTC in itself addresses that very well. I think it gets addressed more when consumer products company move into these sort of enhancement features. And then so you buy an earbud primarily to listen to music or maybe use your voice assistant or whatever. And, you know, it has a restaurant mode, and you go to a restaurant and you throw it in and try it out and you're like, hey, this works pretty good. The problem is that technically, I mean, if you read the OTC regs, the draft regs, and you follow the letter of what they're saying, any device that provides a customized hearing profile is going to fall under OTC. So if you're ruling with an iron fist, it means what Apple's doing with AirPods Pro is now an OTC device, and they would be required to submit. Okay. Now, how is the FDA actually going to treat that? I mean, there are people who point this out. Kim Cavett did, and others as well, is that the dividing line between a PSAP and an OTC really needs to be defined, and it needs to be something reasonable so that innovation in the hearable space can continue. And this is something that Kim said, because she and I have had several conversations about this. Should OTC be required to file pre-market notification with the FDA? And my thinking was, yes, they should, to keep those 1,000, 5-star reviewed $50 bad hearing aids off the market. But that only depends on proper enforcement. And her feeling has been, since the FDA isn't enforcing now, they're never going to enforce it. So why put a stranglehold on innovation in this space when you're not going to enforce the bad actors anyway? And I can see that. Why not allow a certain level of unregulated hearing assistance to take place and let that innovation happen? And in fact, as soon as you have a software-based app economy for your ears, it's going to happen, whether you want it to or not. And there, when you have any number of devices, what happens when Skullcandy opens up the microphones to personalization as well as to streaming music, right? And everybody's walking around trying those features, or down the road a little bit, they may even just pop in when it's super noisy. Like my hearing aids automatically adjust to their surroundings, all right? Well, hearable devices can do that too. Sony's already doing that on a certain level where the ANC changes depending on your environment. So these sorts of things start to happen automatically, and people kind of get let in through the back door to the value of hearing assistance, and you start to break down that barrier.
I love that. I love the backdoor notion. I've thought of it as like a Trojan horse in a sense, because, you have, again, 300 million pairs of these kinds of devices sold in an annual year right now, and that number will just keep going up. So this presents a gigantic opportunity in the sense that what this provides is exposure. It provides subtle exposure to a lot of these types of features that people, probably a lot of which, were completely unaware of even at the point of sale. So I think that it's, it sort of presents this new opportunity of, well, maybe that's one way that you can start to kind of bring people into the fold, is by casually exposing them to the features of this. And I keep thinking about, you're mentioning this app economy. And I think, to make it a little bit more concrete for some people, look at what Nuheara has just done with this Odo app around tinnitus, right? So just through basically an app integration with your Nuheara devices, you can now get like tinnitus therapy delivered directly through your Nuheara devices. And again, like, if you kind of watch how this space is unfolding right now, with going back to this whole theme of the underlying technology is continually improving, one such area is like sensors and this whole notion of sensor fusion. So you mentioned Sony and this ability to have like dynamic ANC. So it's sensing using the microphones, and a combination of that and machine learning. It's understanding like the acoustic environment that you're in, and it's just sort of automatically increasing and decreasing the ANC in your headphones at all times. And so you can imagine that, like, as these devices become more laden with intelligent sensors that are able to detect and determine different elements within your current soundscape, it's going to be able to do all kinds of dynamic things like that. And I think that, for example, with tinnitus, where if there is some trigger that it can identify through your behavior, or through the inflection of your voice through that's being captured with the microphones, or something that identifies that maybe you're having an onslaught of tinnitus, it will maybe start to play some of those noises and that tinnitus therapy for you on your behalf. So I think that these are the kinds of things that really excite me when we talk about a world where the hardware is important, but I think that it's the software that's going to be layered on top of it that's going to allow for all kinds of new, really innovative things that we've never seen before. And again, like, what does the end result look like for that? Well, it just could be that people are actually really incentivized to want to wear these things, and they feel as if there's increasing amounts of features that come along with it. There are these use cases that are becoming more and more a part of their life, whether it be, I just increasingly like to stream music. I like to listen to my podcast throughout my day because I have my AirPods in, and that's just how I go about my day because I have a job that allows for that. Or I have this dynamic active noise cancellation that's just constantly sort of protecting my ears. So I have something that's in my ears, like these Sony devices, that I'm not even listening to anything. I'm actually wearing them from a hearing conservation standpoint. And so because of the fact that you have these things now in the ear already, that presents the opportunity for all kinds of things that can be added on to this. And that's, I think we're at like the really early stages of this, which is step one was you needed to have a foundation of devices in ears, more or less. And that's what we've really seen post AirPods era, is this mass proliferation of the TWS devices. And I think that the really important thing that those of us in the hearing health industry need to really understand from this consumer tech side, like probably the biggest implication of the growth of that industry, is that because of the fact, again, that you have 300 million devices being sold on an annual basis, you have so much more incentive as a developer to be building in this ecosystem applications or something in regards to the fact that you have a target audience now that are wearing things in and around their ears for extended periods of time. And hearing aid wearers are a secondary beneficiary of pretty much all of that technology that's about to be unleashed.
No, absolutely. Well, I think everybody who cares about hearing and hearing professionals and advocates, all benefit because we're bringing the level of awareness of hearing up and making people comfortable with it, right? That's the Trojan horse. I think it's going to come more directly. It's Trojan horse for the moment, but the minute one of the mass consumer companies approaches this in a more straightforward manner, and I think we were talking with Kat when I gave this example, like I love the Apple ads for AirPods, various versions of a person listening to music and dancing up the walls and, this sort of thing, right? They're really stylish and cool. And the minute they make an ad that shows somebody walking into a crowded restaurant and it's a cacophony and they just go like this and touch their AirPod Pro and the noise dims down and they walk up to a friend and greet them and, and look like they're having a perfectly good old time with the noise muted. And, all of a sudden the whole situation changes. That would be a step change in the way people think about hearing. And at some point that's going to come. At some point, a consumer company is going to address hearing in a big, big way.
I couldn't agree more. And again, think about what's going on in the Bluetooth LE audio space too. This is where things start to get really fun is, okay, so you have all these people that are wearing these Bluetooth enabled devices. You have protocols that are not allowing for a lot of tethering between different devices. So, again, we hear about this, one particular instance that's frequently cited as a challenging listening situation is the dinner table at a loud restaurant. Well, again, this cheaters idea. Well, what if you have everybody is tethered into just one iPhone or even directly tethered into each other's earborne devices so that you have direct streaming into each other in a sense, so that you're almost like, in like a comm system, like a walkie-talkie type system that historically had been limited to these literal comms headsets, to where now that's all becoming more commoditized and commercialized and made more available through all kinds of innovation happening on the wireless technology side. So I think that, again, it's really important to be aware of all of the different things that make all of this work in the first place and what's coming in every new phase of what's on the horizon and what that will lend itself to. And I do think that the foundation has been laid these last 5 years for the next phase, which will now be all the new things that are built for that foundation. And that's where I think that you're right, that an Apple, for example, has tremendous ability to really change the way people think about something like hearing health. I think that Apple's biggest contribution to hearing health might not really be on the hardware side. It's yet to be seen what they'll ultimately do with AirPods, if they're going to continue to go down that path or if they'll kind of always just be in the baby pool in a sense. But the bigger contribution might just be with Apple Health and making people really aware of what an audiogram is, what your hearing test looks like your current hearing profile, being able to monitor that and being able to see on a year-over-year basis, how beneficial would it be to have public awareness of how much you're hearing depreciated on a year-over-year basis. And who better to facilitate something like that than one of the big smartphone providers that can house that information. And that's the third-party app ecosystem that we're talking about, which is, if you have these apps that are able to conduct those hearing tests and basically capture that information, and then you can store it in Apple Health, that presents a number of really exciting opportunities too. So I agree with you. We could totally see an ad in the next few years that's all around, basically the hearing portion within hearing health and making it a public, basically a public ad about, the importance of hearing health and making sure that you take good care of your ears kind of thing.
Yeah. You're right about Apple and their whole health ecosystem and the big hearing study they did and being able to see your noise level on your Apple Watch. And they're building a lot of awareness around hearing issues already. I just love it. I love it. I want to go back to Bluetooth 5.2 you mentioned in the beginning, because that's a perfectly good use case for people wearing their true wireless hearables in public places. There's an app called Tunity that I use on occasion, well, more so before the pandemic than now, because we're still not hanging out in sports bars all that much, but it's coming back, But with Tunity, what you do is you point your phone camera at a screen, and it will determine what the channel is, and then stream the audio out of your phone. And since my hearing aids are Bluetooth connected, I could go into a sports bar. The game I want to watch, is on the other end of the room. I could capture the video, the audio starts streaming, and I am listening to the audio of that screen way over there. And because I can mix it in, so I would have it playing in the background and I could still talk to the people at my table. Bluetooth 5.2 will bring that to everybody.
Yep, totally.
So now you go to a sports bar, you want to watch the game, you put the audio for that game on through a Bluetooth channel. Everybody at the table does this. Your buds have gone into noise reducing mode, into restaurant mode, essentially. So you can talk to the people at your table and hear them while hearing the audio for that game. That is one of the most compelling reasons why you would go to a public place wearing true wireless hearable devices. And now once you're going to a public place and you're putting them in restaurant mode, you are now being introduced into hearing tech. And yes. So Bluetooth 5.2 is going to be one of the accelerants. I mean, there are multiple accelerants, and that's going to be one of them. And that's this whole underlying thing. And this is where I kind of hope, in the regulatory environment, that proper accounting for this sort of innovation is actually done in the right way. We want people to innovate in the hearing space, certainly up to a certain level. You're never going to address severely hearing impaired people with a consumer device. And different people have a different feeling about where the line is, but there is a line which is not zero, in which you want to allow innovation to take place and really allow the consumer adoption of hearing solutions to accelerate in the appropriate way.
I couldn't agree more. I love that example. And I think that, you can see it too with what's coming from Bluetooth's broadcast mode. So right now, you have what's kind of an interim solution is looping different environments. So you can have, the telecoil loops in a church or in a theater, whatever it might be, in these public places. There's a lot of capital investment and time that needs to go into that, though. Like there's a lot of a burden on establishing the infrastructure to facilitate that, not to mention that in order to take advantage of that, you have to have a device that is T-coil enabled. So again, this is what I think that this is a good representation of what I mean by, like, when we start to see things that are being developed for the masses, we in the hearing aid industry get to take advantage of that too, because you'll see that, like, you'll have Bluetooth connected hearing aids that have the ability to tap into these broadcast modes that are being built both for hearing aids, but also for AirPods and for all of these TWS devices that can be taking advantage of those different feature sets. So again, I think that it's this really exciting era that we're kind of entering into, where when hearing health is being developed for the masses, if you will, it's going to lend itself to more use cases for the hearing aid population, but B, it's going to provide that exposure. And to your point, like, I don't know if it's a contrarian take or not, but I think that I'm of the mind that this market is going to expand considerably over the coming years because of the fact that you're going to just have so many more people aware of what it even means to have hearing loss and what it feels like to treat it. I think you and I have had a bunch of conversations about this. Like, you can attest to this personally, but part of the biggest problem with hearing loss is that for most people, it's a gradual progression. And so because of that, it's hard to really actually tell that it's happening. It's a slow fade. And so I think that
it's easy to deny that it's happening.
Or it's easy to deny that it's happening. And so this is what makes me so excited about this whole exposure piece is how many people that have gradual hearing loss have even realized some of the sounds that they're no longer hearing. And if you even give them a taste of what that sounds like, again, they're going to have this epiphany where they're going to say, I had forgotten what the birds chirping sounded like. So you go from something that is, in order to get that quote unquote taste, in the old paradigm, you would have had to go and do all the steps involved to get fit with a hearing aid in order to get that. Now we're talking about this back door that you've been describing of buying a pair of $100 headphones that you were completely oblivious that this feature existed. Through an advertise it, through word of mouth or whatever, you come to realize, oh, there's this feature that exists. You turn it on, boom, you hear this you hear the birds chirping again. And that's the exposure effect that I think is coming, where people are going to legitimately say, I had no idea what I was missing out upon. And if it means that it goes from taking them from 7 to 10 years down to 3 years, because in that 3-year period, they're using something that's more situational and they're really cognizant of this. And then they're going to be, I think, more, they're going to be way more open to this idea that there are more sophisticated solutions up the ladder that you can move into that provide higher levels of sophistication of care. And there are experts that are facilitators of that, called audiologists and hearing professionals. So that's the bull argument that I see for this industry, broadly speaking, is that I actually think the biggest thing that this whole consumer tech boom thing that's happening as it relates to hearing health is it's just going to create a massive amount of exposure in the likes that we've never really seen before. I feel like that's what's different this time around.
Yeah, I completely agree. And what you just described is really the hope for all this innovation taking place, is that it compresses the time to treatment at all levels. So in the beginning, people are working situational, and should they go beyond the need for situational, they don't wait nearly as long to go to a full audiological solution. And in half of those cases, people who are situational may very well end up going to a hearing care professional anyway to help them sort out all the options, which I think is a wonderful thing. To separate out a limited set of hardware from hearing care professionals. In other words, if I walk in situational, I might get set up with a consumer solution, or like the Jabra Enhance Plus, right, which is kind of an in-between solution, what have you. More solutions for people at all stages of their journey, engage with them earlier, keep them at the proper place in their journey sooner without the wait. But I also want to mention that, everything we're talking about is kind of a United States centric, or at least
Totally.
a developing country centric. All of this innovation really promises to address what's ultimately a pandemic of untreated hearing loss worldwide. Think about countries where access to audiological care is very, very limited or almost non-existent. All the innovation taking place in this space also can have profound effects globally. And really, if you're in a place where you have limited means, no access to an audiologist at all, but you have access to a local clinic, and they set you up with something which may not be exactly right, but gets you 70 or 80% of the way there, your life has changed. Your life has changed completely. And so the really exciting thing about all the innovation taking place here, which will be driven by the OTC regulations and awareness being built here, is going to have positive global effects.
You said two things. Well, I want to unpack both those because those are such good points. First thing being that, this idea of having more optionality for the whole spectrum of hearing loss is only a boon for the provider, in my opinion. I think that if you can establish that relationship really early on and really kind of move up the ladder with them in time to the point to where they have something that resembles a premium level hearing aid, great, but if you're able to establish that relationship early on, I see nothing but a net positive, because there's a lot more going on here. You can screen them for cognition early on. You can look at some of the different things that are going on beyond just the peripheral auditory system and really get into the central auditory system. Audiologists are doctors of science. So there's so much that they can, I think, understand about these patients and help the patients to understand the value of the provider. Isn't just that they're able to calibrate these devices. It's understanding what the underlying issues are and give you strategies to preserve what you have and make it so that you have the best experience with your hearing for the rest of your life. So that's my argument for why I think it's really important that providers look at anything downward from hearing aids, down from these things that are these hybrid devices, like you said, the Jabra Enhance Plus, all the way down to understanding like what do AirPods Pro do today, and having a finger on the pulse of like that particular portion of the market, how that's progressing. So there's that. And then the other thing that you said about this whole idea of, treating the unserved portion of the world, which is massive, I think is another one of these things that will be a huge driver of innovation in and of itself, because of the fact that, you're going to see the portions of the world that you're right, like they don't have access to the traditional means of hearing care that we're accustomed to here in the US or in parts of Europe. But I think that what will happen is that just by means of necessity, you're going to see a lot of innovation on the self-fitting aspect of things. The ways in which these devices are able to kind of calibrate themselves. I think you're right that like that portion of the world, like you said earlier, if 80% of the total market isn't really being served, it's going to get served in time. And I think that that's what this commoditization and proliferation of TWS headphones, coupled with all of these new, and innovative hearing, like augmentation software capabilities that can be laden on top of that, because of the fact that you have parts of the world now that can get access to an Android smartphone for like $100. And, who knows, maybe they'll be tethering into like SpaceX's, Starlink satellite system, like as their internet provider. I mean, there's so much happening just broadly speaking in consumer technology right now that you're going to see so many interesting little bits and pieces pulled together in a way that it will make what had previously been totally untenable. Like it will make it feasible in increasing amounts of ways. And it will probably help to drive how the whole lower end of the market really starts to take shape.
Yeah, very well said. Very well said. I mean, it's ultimately both people and technology driving towards the future where there are no people with untreated hearing loss.
Totally. All right. Well, I think this has been a fascinating discussion. Again, we've talked about some of this stuff before, but I do think it's really relevant now that, again, I think you make such a good point. Like, is the OTC law sort of irrelevant at this point? I would say no, not really, because I think that it is still important. It does fill a particular void. Having more accessible, affordable hearing aids is really important, but it's not a silver bullet. I think that there's a lot more here that we need to understand of what's kind of going on. And I think you make some really good points about considerations that I really hope the FDA has right now around regulating this and making sure that they do not stymie the level of innovation in some sense. So those are some of my closing thoughts.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. I mean, irrelevant wasn't the word I used. Obsolete was the word, meaning that it fulfills a need for today's condition. But you can already see when you think about it, how many years did it take from the PCAST until it's released is 5 or 6 years, something like that,
it
right?
Would potentially be 6 if it goes into 2023.
So, you're talking 5 or 6 years between conceiving the need, and I don't mean originally because people have been talking about it before, but the PCAST really kicked off the process, and it was 6 years until we see regulations, 5 or 6. So if you take another 5 years, it's not that it's irrelevant, but we've got to get going now on thinking about what's coming and how to appropriately allow innovation and, as available, appropriate regulation to protect people from genuinely bad actors for what's coming 5 years from now already, right? The 5-year clock has already started. And that was really the point of the article.
The 5-year clock, and in consumer tech, like you said, that's an eternity. Especially, it will feel even more like an eternity 5 years from now, because every single year it's like exponentialism. It just seems to kind of be a hockey stick up, right? So I think that we're due for just so much that will transpire around the software, around the hardware. Again, I'm a firm belief that one of the big things that will really reimagine hearing aids will be the sensors that are going to be laden onto these devices and onto just earworm devices in general. And again, my big point that I always try to articulate is like, put yourself in the shoes of the mobile developer that struck gold back in 2010 when they made an iPhone app. A lot of those still same people, they've been bouncing around building applications for all kinds of different products. And I think that the ear now is definitely a spot that a lot of people are looking at, as there's some really interesting applications that can be built upon the notion of, hey, look around. Everybody seems to have something in their ear right now. There's a lot of doors that opens up, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great way to end this. Is it? The doors are opening up.
The doors are opening up. Awesome, Andy. Well, thanks so much for joining me today. And thanks for everybody who tuned in here to the end. We'll chat with you next time.